Welcome to the Capital Forum's Antitrust Thought Leaders series. I'm Jeff Bliss, and today I have with me Mark Ostrau, who is head of the regulatory practice at Fenwick and West. Welcome, Mark. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
And I just want to tell viewers that last time we actually sat down face-to-face was many years ago in 2011 in Silicon Valley Winery. And we had a really good discussion about antitrust, parts of which I remember over a bottle of wine. I guess my first question is, what has really changed from that time when we had that discussion to what's going on now? Obviously, there have been, in some ways, there's some sea changes. In some ways, no. So why don't you tell me what you think?
Yeah, I think that's right. And by the way, you haven't aged.
Either of you.
Your first lie. But so it's actually interesting because I think there are things that are the same, frankly, and that a lot of the noise and thinking about a sea change is a little bit hyperbolic. But on the other hand, there are some important differences that have caused there to be more focus. So there has been tech antitrust enforcement for a long time. And it's been in the Valley from even before 2000. Where there've been an active, parade of cases that both agencies have brought against, particularly against mergers, but even monopolization cases. And
like, I just want to break out. It's like you live in. I mean, you work in Silicon Valley. You're in a state that's been pretty active. Especially recently. Is that fair to say, through state laws and dealing with, various things? They brought a case against Amazon.
Yeah. I mean, the California antitrust capabilities within the state are actually quite good, and they do bring cases, under the Cartwright Act, which has some similarities, it's interesting because in some ways what's happening at the federal level mimics to some extent the choice of cases that states bring. And the reason I say that is that tech, people didn't think that there was a lot of tech enforcement for many years because the enforcement that happened wasn't well known. It was between semiconductor companies, it was between semiconductor software companies, it was between business to business.
So people like me weren't writing headlines about it, right?
Right. Okay. It was not something that people would read in their morning paper. But now, like the states, the choice of companies that are the subject of enforcement tend to be more consumer facing or just more entrenched in the economy and well known. And so that's sort of the maturation of tech as well, that now you've got household names. I mean, I laugh. I've done a lot of work for Cisco Systems over the years,
right.
Talking about infrastructure and hidden things. But they've, years ago, they decided to brand like Intel, like branding themselves in ads. And it was somewhat humorous because it's like, nobody knows what these people do, actually. But now everyone knows what Google does. Everyone knows Amazon. Everyone knows all of, Apple. So it's so that's a big difference. But that's sort of how the states, choose their cases too. They want to look at cases that have the most impact to consumers. So
right. So that, I think, certainly longtime antitrust observers. I mean, you were talking about whether it's a sea change or not. And certainly, depending on how you look at it, you can see it different ways. But I will say some of the longtime antitrust observers, they felt they had a handle on when the FTC or DOJ was going to do something and when they were not going to. And I get from a lot of readers and just people who have been in this industry for a while, this sector for a while, they're less sure now in this current administration, which a lot of people would deem is obviously very aggressive. Is there anything in terms of indications or just kind of that you see in terms of how these enforcers are dealing with so-called big tech, kind of like a list of things like, oh, this if this is the type of conduct they're really looking at and things like that.
Yeah, there are some differences both substantively and procedurally that have raised the level of unpredictability. I mean, that's really what you're getting at. And so procedurally, at least at the FTC, for forever the merger shops had a lot of discretion and autonomy to evaluate cases, to make their recommendations. Now, most of that decision making is consolidated at the front office, and so you don't get the indications that you would normally get in the conversations because they're hamstrung. The staff is they're delivering messages back and forth, and so so things happen there, and so that adds to a lot of misunderstandings about what the real concerns are, or, and whether there are concerns. The more importantly, most people care about is the substance, and there is definitely a difference there. For the longest time, the agencies looked at mergers, understood that mergers can be positive or negative or neutral, frankly. Right. And their job was to evaluate the potential competition issues, and if they found some, figure if there's a way to fix that concern and still retain whatever benefits to the economy the merger might have. You get the sense now that there's much more antipathy toward mergers generally.
I mean, just to be clear, we're talking about tech in general, or are we talking about large tech companies buying other companies? Is it more the latter?
It is probably the latter.
Okay.
Yeah. Because and some of it, and it comes from a couple of different ways. Some of it is better understanding of tech ecosystems and the ability of a large player to affect adjacent markets. It's telling if anyone looks back at the FTC's reviews of Google DoubleClick and AdMob, and how much they gave deference to the infancy of the ad market and things changing, and they wouldn't say those things today. So
right, they don't, obviously, and they have it's a very set opinion. You're right. One of the first things I worked on was Google AdMob, and I remember there was like, well, maybe this, maybe that. There was a little bit back and forth, but yeah, now it's pretty much. And let's be totally clear. Are you saying this basically the Democratic majority? Because obviously we're talking about in terms of FTC, we have 2 Republican commissioners on there. But are you seeing it in both parties that they're having enforcers that are kind of coming to these conclusions? Like, yeah, something like we need to be tougher on enforcement of big tech mergers, or is it mostly? Are you hearing it from one side in your view?
Well, so the view of mergers or big is bad, the neo-Brandeisian, all of those things, that tends to be more, more based on politics than so there is definitely a difference between the current administration versus administrations that were more Republican heavy. But in fairness, I think everyone realizes that some of the blind adherence to Chicago school economics is problematic in these kinds of industries, and so I think everybody understands that no, there could be issues, and it is you have to take a little more nuanced view of the harms that could come that are not just.
And this is a really good point. This is one reason I really wanted to have you here is in terms like the industry and health, there might be some things inherent to it. And I just want to be clear about some things. And I want you to tell me if this is what your view is. It would be something like network effects, for example, that you would see in certain tech industries, that it's more have that as opposed to other sectors. Is that the type of thing you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Network effects and interoperability. I mean, now it's not a new
Yes.
thing. I mean,
No.
interestingly enough, there were cases, I worked, it was a long time ago, on an acquisition by Cadence Design Systems of Cooper and Chen Technologies, semiconductor design software, not front page news. But the whole question was, Cooper and Chen had a tool, Cadence had a platform. The concern was, would they limit, post-merger, would they limit access to the platform or degrade the access to the platform?
We've heard this sounds very similar to what's going on now. Yes.
Yeah. But I think it's, instead of one-off issues, it's kind of recognized that this is, a lot of key parts of the tech economy have those platform and interoperability and network effect issues.
Yeah, and I did cover the tech industry, not as an antitrust reporter, but as a tech reporter in the 90s. And I remember these issues bubbling up then on PCs and things like that. There was, this is even going back to the 80s, where you had Apple's view of the PC world. Let's get into the Apple universe, and then the IBM compatible world, PC compatible world, which is no, let's try to share things. And so even back then, I'm not saying there was necessarily an antitrust issue, maybe whatever, but there was that dynamic of like interoperability. Can you get Mac programs to work with PC? So my point being is kind of what you were saying. This has been true in the tech industry, I'm sure even preceding computers, but that's like the way the tech works,
Yeah, there needs to be more people like to use that term, co-opetition. There's more, everyone has to play well with everyone else, even when they're competitors, which is unusual. Most industries don't have that dynamic.
Yeah. So so you're bringing it now where they like you said, they have very specific opinions on this. So in terms of when you're advising clients about a merger in the tech space, is there an added part to your speech, that the spiel that you give, like this is what to expect now? You have a couple additions to that speech?
Yeah. Well, the one truism that is, because we're prognosticating all the time, but the one truism is everything takes longer.
Okay.
And part of that, it's within the U.S., the agencies come in with more skepticism, so they want to leave no stone unturned. They want to understand more. They want to look at issues that nobody looked at before, like labor issues and things like that. There was labor. I mean, if you remember the anti-poaching case from years ago,
right? Which I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, started in the Obama administration, where they seemed to be doing a lot, or maybe even there might have even been some spade work done in the Bush II administration. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. So part of it is there's more things to look at, and more concerns with issues, more focus on nascent competition than there used to be, because I think there's an appreciation that for a lot of these markets, there's not just competition in the market, but you have to protect competition for the market. And so that, some of these nascent disruptors, again, that's not new. Visa Plaid was that,
right.
And before that, Microsoft was that. It was like, someone disrupting someone's position. But so those things take longer. And, shout out to the Europeans that they're, more cases and more cases are getting serious looks, in those places, and the CMA is more and more active. So, so that's one big part, is like, you just have to bake in time, which is hugely problematic, frankly, because for M&A, and particularly tech M&A, where all of your assets leave the office every day and walk out, to the extent they even come to the office anymore. But, holding people together for a long period of time is next to impossible. It kills the deal just because of the time delay. So that's a very important part. But then also the understanding that, a lot of times the first thing we'd go into a deal if there was some problem, some potential for problematic, some problems, then we'd start looking at, well, how can we fix it? And how can we offer a fix? And, now it's like, well, we don't have to just offer a fix. We have to be super compelling and expect that we might have to litigate the fix and not just, negotiate it. And so that's, that changes how you think about deals and whether you get into them and not. Because, the fact of the matter is there's only a very small number of companies who are going to be willing to deal with the time and expense and risk of litigating a case. So,
Can you give that is a really compelling point. I mean, could you give me an idea, like let's say it's a deal that might be problematic, erring on the safe side, you're like, we might have to prepare for litigation. How much do you would you say, like, this could be a 12 to 18 month process? Is that the time window, or is it longer, shorter than that?
I mean, that's about right. I mean, I try, frankly, for most of our clients, which tend to be the emerging tech companies, I can't say 18 months. They don't, that's for many of them, that's a large portion of their entire life for some of these founders.
Yeah.
So you can't say that, but 12 months is something, that you have to push them to, and that already sets their hair on fire. So, but I think that's right. And if it's going to take longer than that, that's going to really put at issue whether they do the deal at all.
Okay, so would it be fair to say there might be some deals that stay in the boardroom and that are not getting launched as a result of the current environment? Is that fair to say?
Yeah. I mean, and unfortunately, I think it was Rebecca Slaughter who might have been the one who said about, or I'm not sure now, who talked about the some deals shouldn't make it out of the boardroom. Unfortunately, that's happening, but not for substantive reasons. It's for practical reasons. In other words, they may think that the deal is fine, but they see that it will take too long to accomplish it, and so they can't do it.
Interesting. I also wanted to go back to, and maybe we could because we could talk all day about this stuff. There's a lot going on in tech and antitrust. But one final point I wanted to tell you, brought up the whole labor issue. And I assume you're talking about labor monopsony, and which is a very interesting issue in the tech field, because you have people, I assume these engineers have extremely specific and important specialized skills. And I assume you're, again, tell me if I'm going off here, but it would be the agencies looking at them about whether the labor markets, the competition for those skills is less, and they get, as a result, reduced wages and benefits that they, as opposed to the world without a merger. Is that is that generally the dynamic?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, you're mostly seeing it in kind of the anti-poaching and the stuff against non-competes, but it's become a very important issue for AI, because the real resource and asset in AI these days is a pretty small group of very smart people. So so that kind of figures into the dynamic. Is it's like, are you limiting the options for those people to get the outsized returns that they should have, because they really
zillions of dollars that they are earning doing this unbelievable technology, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. So AI it's presenting there. Do you see any other parts of tech where you see some really specialized workers who monopsony might be an issue?
Every once in a while it's popped up in some gaming type things. I mean, because game deals themselves present very little antitrust issue. I mean, there's a lot of games. So, but they're, but just like, frankly, it's just the new version of the old studio system where, the people working on the front lines, like doing animation, they didn't have a lot of bargaining power, and that the studios could take advantage of that. Same thing with game studios. There could, there'd be a concern that the people doing the games have fewer options. So that that's kind of a place where it is, but it's it hasn't hit as large as places where there are traditional labor. Those are really the acquisitions where I think there's the most chance of making those arguments really stick.
Interesting. All right. Well, we could go on for another 2 hours, and we'd have to crack open a bottle of wine or two probably to, to talk about some of this stuff. But as usual, it's been fascinating to talk to you, Mark. I appreciate you spending time with us this morning.
Sure, it was my pleasure.